Well, let's bring in Chase Brown right now from 11warriors.com. He covers, of course, Ohio State football. How you doing today, Chase?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm preparing a little bit for the impending doom of a football season, but also I'm expecting it to be a lot of fun. Always being in the media, there's a sort of a dread and an excitement that the busiest time of your year is starting, but then also you get to cover the sport that you love. So I'm looking
That's right.
forward to it.
That's right. You come out of camp and you need to take a nap for a couple days and you jump right into the season. But, you got to
Right.
do what you got to do, I guess. Before we talk specifically about Ohio State, I wanted to ask you about, this USC, UCLA, and just kind of how that went over there in Columbus. What folks in that part of the Big Ten country think about it.
Yeah, it was pretty abrupt. I remember sitting in an office with a couple of my coworkers, and we see this tweet from John Wilner come across our timelines. He was the first reporter to
Right.
have the actual report that USC and UCLA were going to be leaving the Pac-12 and joining the Big Ten, and we weren't exactly sure what to do with it at first. We were like, well, can we trust this guy? It's somebody we hadn't really heard of before.
Uh-huh.
But in our best interest, we saw, he has over 50,000 followers on Twitter. I'm sure it's way higher now. But we were like, okay, let's run with it. Let's see where it goes. And, soon enough, we see everybody else is running with it too. And eventually Ohio State sends a release out and USC and UCLA send a release as well as the Big Ten. And it just all kind of came into fruition very quickly. We ended up having a press conference the next day with Gene Smith, Ohio State's athletic director, and the president of the university, Christina Johnson, to kind of talk about that deal. And they're very excited for it. They're excited about the possibilities that it brings for Ohio State. And they're also looking forward to what it can do in growing the brand of the Big Ten and continuing to establish it as one of the premier conferences in college athletics.
Yeah, obviously, big shots, big ripple effects across college football. It's going to be really interesting to see how things shake out going forward. There's all that talk about Notre Dame and talk about other conferences as well that they might end up getting, or not other schools joining the conference that they might get up to 20 here in the next few years. So I think everyone's going to be kind of everyone outside the Big Ten and the SEC will just kind of be sitting on their hands and a little bit of nerves over these next few years, waiting to see what the next kind of shoot of fall happens to be.
That's kind of what it feels like. I think that the Big Ten is putting itself in a good position to sort
Yeah,
of be the other conference that maybe dukes it out with the SEC for television eyeballs, and they're putting together a conference that has a lot of top brands, especially in college football. It already had a pretty good standing when it comes to programs like Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State. Nebraska hasn't been very good recently, but
yep.
the kind of football tradition, its rich history there. And adding a school like USC and adding a school like UCLA only continues to bring a football tradition to the conference. And I'm sure that they'll be looking for more schools down the line to be adding to the conference as well.
Yep. Ohio State, it's crazy when a two-loss season ends up being one of your more disappointing seasons in recent memory, I guess. But that's kind of what they dealt with coming out of last year. What's Ryan Day's popularity level right now? Does he have any detractors? What's it like for him?
I wouldn't say he has any detractors, but I do think that there are people that want to see him deliver on winning a national championship. It's been a long time since Ohio State has hoisted that college football playoff trophy. Obviously, they were the first team to do it back in 2014, that 2014-15 season. The story behind that, it's probably one of the most well-told stories in college football history of having three quarterbacks play in that season and having that third string quarterback lead Ohio State to a title. But I think Ryan Day is a coach that people around Columbus love. They love his offensive mind. They love that he has created a place where quarterbacks, high level quarterbacks, want to come play, and wide receivers as well. Brian Hartline's doing an incredible job recruiting that position. And I think that now this season, knowing that there is someone with experience like Jim Knowles handling the defense and the staff that he's brought in to help him, that Ohio State has expectations to beat Michigan, to win the Big Ten championship, and to win a national title this season, to be one of the teams that'll be in the college football playoff and then to eventually win it all.
If they're going to do that, of course, CJ Stroud is going to be a big part of it. He ended up having a great year last year, first year as a starter. I'm curious with him. They start off a little bit of a scare. They're trailing Minnesota at halftime, kind of turn it on in the second half. They end up winning. They lose to Oregon the next week. They beat Tulsa. I think he had 3 of his 4 interceptions in those first 3 games, though, last season. And it seems like not everyone maybe was completely sold on Stroud at that point. That's kind of the memory I have, just kind of thinking about some of the, the national bullet points and things like that. Is that fair to say at that point, where the
Yeah.
way things started out?
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that kind of came as a surprise to me. Looking at our message boards, at our forums, and seeing more than a few Ohio State fans sort of pushing the alarm and saying maybe Kyle McCord's better to lead this team. Maybe Jack Miller is somebody that should step in and lead this team and lead the offense. But CJ Stroud, yeah, it took him some time to get acclimated with being the quarterback at Ohio State, but it should take anyone a good amount of time. It's one of the best programs in college football, and it's not that he was taking over initially against what we may consider a cupcake team. He had to go on the road to Minnesota, night game. There was some rain, so it didn't really start off against an opponent that he could get his feet wet and kind of find his groove. It was, this is ready to go. You need to be ready to go playing against Minnesota, and then week 2 they come back and play Oregon. So he was kind of thrown into the fire a little bit, and then against Tulsa, kind of lightened up a little bit. But then also he was been dealing with some shoulder injuries and some shoulder problems early in that season. It seemed that when they eventually rested him for the Akron game, and he was able to heal up that shoulder, the rest of the season was just a trajectory unlike anything that we've seen from an Ohio State quarterback.
So as he comes into this season, I imagine he feels just like a completely different quarterback than the one at this time a year ago.
Absolutely. And Ryan Day has said as much. Last year leading into the season, almost every time we met with Coach Day, there was a question about who the starting quarterback was going to be. Now everyone just asks about what Ryan Day is seeing from CJ Stroud and what's made him the best quarterback in the country. And Ryan Day isn't quite ready to bestow that title on his quarterback, kind of trying to keep him hungry a little bit, but he knows the kind of special talent that he has in CJ Stroud, and that there really is no bad thing that he can say about him. Just needs to continue to develop in his arm strength, continue to develop in his accuracy, and continue to be a more willing leader, which he has been this offseason. And he was the only unanimous pick to be a team captain for Ohio State this season. And it seems like he is responding to anything that Ryan Day has put in front of him.
Seems like as I look at this offense and I'm trying to find, okay, where are the real question marks? It seems like it's mostly depth issues, like when like what's the depth going to be at running back, or whatever it happens to be. What do you think is the biggest question that they have to answer offensively?
Offensively, really, you're right. There aren't too many questions. There was one quote that offensive coordinator and tight ends coach Kevin Wilson had about Ohio State's ability to create push up front from their offensive line, to really be talented in those short yard situations. It's a new look offensive line. There are 3 returning starters, but Paris Johnson, who started at guard last year, is kicking out to left tackle. So you're going to have an offensive line with Paris Johnson, Luke Whippler, and DeJuan Jones that are returning, but then you insert new guys like Donovan Jackson and Matthew Jones, who Matthew Jones was someone that kind of was a rotation offensive lineman for Ohio State last season. So he does have some starting experience, but this will be the first time that he'll be relied on to be a guy that goes in every day and is going to be the starter for all 12 regular season games and beyond. So for Ohio State's offensive line, it really is getting that push up front and being able to establish the run game for guys like Travion Henderson and Mayan Williams and Dallin Hayden.
Defensively, a few more questions. I mean, obviously, when you change defensive coordinators and most of the defensive staff, you're going to have some questions. And probably from our end, we've beaten up the whole Michigan, Oregon, and the rushing totals and all that kind of stuff to death, from our end, looking at things. But they bring in Knowles. So How different do you expect them to look on the defensive side this year compared to last year?
I'm not quite sure yet. I think that Ohio State has done a pretty good job keeping exactly what that defense will look like this season under wraps. But from what I can tell, Jim Knowles is trying to create as much chaos defensively as possible. The word that a lot of the players have been using is multiple. Knowles wants this defense to be multiple in the sense that they're going to throw a lot of different coverages at opposing offenses, and they're going to rely heavily on that defensive line to get home, which is something that Ohio State hasn't done since really the departure of Chase Young in 2019. They need a defensive end, they need a defensive tackle that can really just be a disruptor up front. And I think they're really relying on those guys to create havoc for opposing quarterbacks and running backs. That way, when it gets to the next level of linebackers and safeties and cornerbacks, that those guys can be the ones making plays. Just a lot of chaos, a lot of hectic, helter skelter kind of stuff. But I think Knowles has a good plan moving forward.
Well, and again, this is from the outside looking in, but like if they're going to rely that much on the defensive line, they obviously have some guys who are highly recruited, but they haven't necessarily, and some of them are young still, but they haven't necessarily played up to that level yet. It seems like a lot to rely on considering, like they just don't look like they've got the guy up front on that defensive line right now. What do you think?
I would agree. I think that you're kind of hoping that a guy like JT Tuimoloau or a guy like Jack Sawyer would step into that role as sophomores. Zach Harrison is somebody that came in as a highly recruited defensive end and a highly recruited edge rusher, but you haven't really seen him prove it through his first 3 seasons at Ohio State, and maybe that comes this season. It's something that he's looking forward to. But what you need to see out of those guys is somebody that can really be relied on, a very talented edge rusher that can get to the quarterback. It just seems like they've always been maybe a half second too late to getting that sack, to securing that takedown. So maybe guys like JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are people that you're going to look to be those kind of game wreckers this season.
Jim Knowles, like you were talking about chaos and multiple, but he's also said that this is a safety driven defense. And I'm curious, like, what does that actually mean? I haven't really seen it, put to paper, I guess. What does it mean to have a safety driven defense?
It's a good question because I'm not really sure what it means either. Um, I'm excited to see exactly what he's talking about when he brings something like that up. Ohio State uses 3 safeties, or Knowles uses 3 safeties in his scheme. There's 2 of the traditional, the free safety and the strong safety roles. But he has, these new look names like Rover and Bandit, sort of the bullet that Ohio State's been using in years past. But I think where the chaos comes is with those safeties, is that there's always going to be 3 safeties on the field. Now, where do you put them? Is there going to be a safety that's up closer to the line of scrimmage? Will there be one that lines up almost like a linebacker? Will there be one that's 15 to 20 yards off the ball down the field, providing coverage over the top? And I think what the chaos is that Jim Knowles is looking to put those different safeties in different spots so that a quarterback can never guess exactly what's coming. And that those safeties will be key to creating that chaos and allowing Ohio State to do some of the things defensively that might lead to some disruption for an opposing team's offense.
Well, and that's interesting in this matchup specifically because you've got a guy like Michael Mayer, who's obviously such a big part of Notre Dame's offense. And so I imagine those safeties are going to come into play when it comes to defending Michael Mayer Saturday night.
Yeah, and Knowles said yesterday that they understand that Michael Mayer is an elite tight end at the college football level, and that he's going to be an NFL tight end. I'm not sure how you guys might break him down, but at least in my estimation, he's probably going to be the first at that position taken off the board in next year's NFL draft. So Ohio State's game planning heavily to be able to stop him. They understand that there's a first-year quarterback coming into the shoe, somebody that likes to run it a little bit more than they like to throw it. But when you have a big target as Michael Mayer over the middle or running out into the flats, it gets pretty easy to throw him the football. So you're going to need to defend him heavily to make sure that part of the passing attack is not utilized as frequently as maybe they'd like to be.
Yep, exactly. And yeah, I mean, the Bowers kid from Georgia, there's a lot of love for him, but it just sure seems like again, we get to see Michael Mayer every game, so we see what he's all about. If he's not the first, he'll be the second tight end off the board, I would think. I think they both have a really good chance to be first round guys. But this first game, it is a first game. Neither one of these team gets any kind of tune up coming into this game. First game of the season. Does that, despite Notre Dame is obviously a big underdog going into this game, like from your perspective as you sit and you look at this, are there enough unknowns to kind of make you go, well, I don't know, just because it is an opener?
I think so. I've kind of been uncertain what to think of the 17.5 point spread in favor of Ohio State, only
Yeah.
really because it's the first game of the season. I understand that Ohio State fans are hungry, that, last season wasn't exactly what they wanted from their football team, and that 105,000 fans are going to be packed into Ohio Stadium on September 3rd. But, when it comes down to it, I think that this game will be more entertaining and probably closer than people might think. I'd like to say that Ohio State, um, at least right now, is a team that will cover the spread in most of their games this season, but I'm not sure about this one. I think Notre Dame has a lot to like, a lot that's unproven, and a lot that can't really be scouted by Ohio State's coaching staff. And so, I'll give them their credit where it's due, and I think that this game will be closer than maybe we expect.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, Ohio State had to get by Minnesota. Now, granted, they're in the same situation Notre Dame's in with a new first year starting quarterback on the road and all that. But like Notre Dame last year goes to Florida State, and it wasn't a very good Florida State team. It wasn't a good Florida State team the year before, but it ends up being an overtime game that Notre Dame was, just able to get out of there with. It just seems like in college football with no preseason games, there's that element that can make things look a lot different than any of us think they're going to look. It's like because we're basing most of the things on what we saw last year.
Right. And I think that if Notre Dame withstands maybe the initial punch from Ohio State's offense, let's say CJ Stroud comes out and leads an opening drive and scores a touchdown, maybe gets the crowd into it, but then Notre Dame comes back down on the very next drive and scores a touchdown to tie it up, then I think we know what this game will look like. I think that people are expecting Ohio State to maybe be the better team here, as indicated by the line. But I do think that Notre Dame, you need to put some respect on the fact that they're the number 5 team in the country. They have the respect of AP voters, of the coaches poll. So there needs to be that kind of respect for them. And that if Notre Dame comes into this game and responds well, especially in those opening moments, I think that we're going to be in for a good one.
Will this season, from an Ohio State perspective, will it be seen as a failure if they're not at least in the national championship game, if not winning the national championship?
I think so. And I think that that's kind of become the expectation, sort of the floor for Ohio State football is to make the college football playoff. I'm not sure if really you'd say the national championship is the floor since the turn of becoming the college football playoff. You'd like to think so, but also Ohio State has been to the college football playoff more times than not. But then also they've played for a national championship only twice. In 2014, they ended up winning over Oregon. In 2020, they lost to Alabama. So you would think that this Ohio State team has expectations to go all the way. So I do think that that would be a failure, in the mind of the coaching staff and in the mind of the fans if they don't end up hoisting a national championship trophy this year.
So finish this sentence for this game. For Notre Dame to make a game out of it, this has to happen.
That's a great question. I would say win the turnover battle. If Notre Dame's defense, I look at guys like Isaiah Foskey as a playmaker in this game. If he can, cause a turnover with a forced fumble, um, you know, turn that into a short field advantage for Notre Dame's offense to score and maybe take the lead. There are some guys on Notre Dame's defense that are playmakers, and I think that if they can win the turnover battle and that they can force Stroud or Henderson or Williams into some turnovers, that could change the game drastically.
All right, Chase Brown, 11warriors.com. Great stuff from you, Chase. Appreciate having you on today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's been great.
Absolutely.